There's an interview that I did a little while back with Richard Marles, Labor's defence spokesman, who is one of Labor's most impressive people. He's a friend of mine, of course, but apart from being a mate, he's a very clever fellow who has, I think, a very measured view of where Australia stands in East Asia and where our future might lie. So I think that's worth definitely catching up on. And then we'll talk some cyber security. So plenty on tonight, that I promise you. So let's just first rip off to Richard Marles, who's Labor's defence spokesman. Here it is. Labor's just had a big loss in an election that you expected to win. Most people expected Labor to win. How's morale now, and what do you have to do to get back into a winning position? Because Labor's governed only 20 of the last 75 years. There's something wrong, isn't there?
Well, certainly it was a devastating result 2 weeks ago. There's no sugarcoating that. And I think everyone would understand that as we met yesterday, there was an enormous sense of grief, really, about what happened. I think there is a determination in the midst of all of this that we need to deal with the stat that you've just referred to. Like, there are millions of Labor supporters out there who are crying out for us to be in a position to win an election and govern this country. We know what great Labor governments can do, and you were part of one, and there is an enormous hunger to be a part of that in the future. And so we are really focused and actually ultimately optimistic about our ability to do this in 2022. But, you know, there's a big job ahead of us, and we've got to go through the process, I suppose, of coming to terms with the fact that the proposition we put before the Australian people a couple of weeks ago was rejected. And that's a hard thing to say and to acknowledge, but it's the truth. And we need to deal with that, learn from it, work out how we're going to move forward and do so and put ourselves in a winning position in 2022, and that is what we are going to do. You
went into that last election with two policies on franking credits and negative gearing, which just put your hand in, and anyone over 50, your hand was in their pocket. They didn't like it very much. Are those policies going to be junked? Or at least one of them has to be. You cannot continue with two policies like that. I think it was crazy to go into the election with both of them. Where does the party stand on that now?
Well, you and I were sitting next to each other on election night, and you made that point on election night. I think we need to start again is the first thing, and we need to be looking at the election thoroughly and all the policies we took to the election thoroughly. And I think it's important that we not rush to judgment about exactly which policy had what effect and how we ended up in the place that we did. I think we honour the decision of the Australian people by actually taking the time to think it through and make sure that we get it right going forward. And so, you know, that's what we're going to do. And we are. Anthony's made it clear that we're going to hasten slowly here. We don't have to be working out all the answers to these questions in the next week. We've got the time to do it, and we should take the time. But we'll be starting again in terms of the way in which we go about looking at all of that. But, Graham, the other point is, you know, we need to be focusing on holding this government to account. I mean, they're the issue now. And they are a government without an agenda who got elected with little or no mandate at all. It's not exactly clear what they're about or what they're going to do. And we need to be really putting the focus and the asset on that. And that's what we're going to do.
You see, I think in just that sentence, you encapsulated how bad the result was for Labor. Because you're right, they got elected without an agenda. They got elected promising very little, which of course makes their life very easy. You don't break promises if you haven't made them. So they're in good shape. But getting back to where we were originally, Labor has governed only 20 out of 75 years in round figures. Why? Why is it that the people have been reluctant to vote Labor, not just at this election, but in so many elections over that time?
I mean, you can look at large periods of that time, and there are particular reasons why. I think you can look at the Whitlam governments and the Hawke governments, and we can learn a lot of lessons, good and bad, from them. One of the issues is that we're a reforming party and we seek to make change, and doing that in a way which is sensible and pragmatic and practical, that you do it over time, is always a challenge for us. And we saw during the Whitlam government that, in a sense, we had a magnificent agenda that we got wrong in terms of the speed with which it was trying to be implemented. But during the government of which you're a part, those decisions about how to pace it out were made right, and what we had was a long-term Labor government which was the foundation of modern Australia. So that's what we need to emulate. I think the other point, though, is that we need to be connecting with the broadest range of Australians that we possibly can. And in a sense, we need to lift our eyes to make sure that we're doing that. It's important that people who go to work every day, that wear overalls, get dirty, come home, that they continue to identify with Labor as their natural party of choice. It's really important that people out there who, from that position or other positions, seek to improve their place in society and make money, that they identify that Labor can be a party for them. It's really important that people of faith see that the Labor Party is a party that is theirs too. And so we've really got to have the broadest possible message to the broadest range of Australians if we're going to build the kind of support base which will elect us into the future. And I think when you look back at Hawke Keating, and be interested in your views, but it seems to me that that's what that government did. It spoke to a very broad range of Australians, which became a support base for a long-term Labor government, which was actually able to achieve magnificent Labor things, and that's what we need to be.
Yeah, so you mentioned people of faith, and I think because the Prime Minister is so open about his faith, that has become an issue that it really hasn't been in the past, has it? I mean, I don't recall people using this expression until very recently.
It's true, and certainly that is a characteristic of the Prime Minister, but it's not unique to the Prime Minister. And there are many very senior figures within Labor who are people of faith as well. And I think the point here is that people of faith need to feel comfortable that the Labor Party can be a party for them. And we need to be really mindful that that's the way we are projecting, that's the way we're coming across, and that we are speaking to them as we're speaking to a much broader range of Australians. And the listening tour, which Anthony Albanese is on at the moment, is, I think, about trying to make sure that we present ourselves in that way. We want to understand from people how we can connect and engage with the broadest range of Australians possible, and that's going to be our challenge over the next 3 years.
Okay, can I turn to your shadow portfolio of defence? Is it a concern to you that President Trump appears to be far more isolationist than any of his predecessors?
I don't know that it's possible to characterise President Trump as simply as that. Certainly it is true that what we want from America is an outward-looking nation that seeks to engage with the world. Certainly we want a United States which is as present as possible in the East Asian time zone. If you look at the United States military footprint in East Asia, it will actually grow during the period of the first term of this Trump administration. So that's not isolationist in that sense. But obviously, the withdrawal of America from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, has got to be a concern for Australia, and for those who want to make the argument about American isolationism, that's kind of Exhibit A. We just need to be, as a nation, in the context of our alliance with the United States, constantly making the point to the US and arguing with them for their continued presence in the world and for their continued presence in our part of the world. And that's got to be a core mission of ours in terms of how we engage with the US in an alliance which continues to be, probably is as relevant and important to Australia now as it's ever been.
It certainly is, but you keep getting the feeling when you listen to him, to Trump that is, that he just doesn't have his heart in this alliance, and nor does he have his heart in the alliance with the Europeans either. he's telling them they've got to start to pull their weight. I mean, does he consider Australia a nation that's pulled its weight?
Oh, I think he does. And so I actually wouldn't agree with the characterisation of how he sees the alliance with Australia. His message to other alliance partners of they're needing to pull their weight is actually a message that's fair enough. I mean, countries need to make sure that they are having an appropriate spend on defence and participating in the world's affairs and not, in a sense, riding on the coattails of the United States. But no one could make that criticism of Australia. You know, we are present in terms of global operations around the world, and you and I have spoken previously about Australia's role in Afghanistan and in Iraq. We are taking our spend to 2% of GDP, which is the global benchmark that President Trump refers to, and there are many European nations which are nowhere near that. So I think President Trump does see Australia as a country which pulls its weight, and I'd have to say in my dealings with the US administration, and I've had a number in the last 3 years, there is a genuine sense of warmth about and satisfaction about the nature of the alliance with Australia, and that's a good thing. From our point of view, we need to be making sure that America remains present in East Asia, and that needs to be the objective of how we engage in the alliance. And to that end, I think it's really important that we do more in terms of sharing the burden of strategic thought with the United States about how this part of the world operates, and that's very much something that I'm keen to pursue.
Yeah, and listening to your words, though, I mean, is there a chasm or any sort of gap between what the administration thinks, as in, you know, the foreign policy experts and all the rest of it, what they think, as distinct from what the Prime Minister, what the President thinks, because he so often shoots from the hip. Now, I know you can't concede that, but that's how it looks to the great majority of us, is it just looks like he gets up in the morning and changes his mind and the world has to change with him. It doesn't make for an easy alliance, does it?
Well, firstly, President Trump, in my view, is clearly the person who's running the United States, and I think his power has grown over the term of this administration. I suspect President Trump would describe his unpredictability as a virtue, and I understand that's how he's gone about the way he operates, and that sometimes does make life challenging. But I do think that President Trump, and certainly as it's been reflected by people in the White House who I've spoken to, values the relationship with Australia, and that's really important. And at least in a defence context, he's very keen to maintain a presence in East Asia, and that is also really important. The gap that has been created is the absence of the American presence in the TPP, and it really is important that there be an American economic strategy in East Asia as well, and that's where we've got to direct our global advocacy, or our advocacy within the alliance, to the United States.
Yeah, look, I can understand that. Final question, though. How do we manage our relationship with China, given that it's a massive trading partner, absolutely massive, and yet it's still running up against the United States in so many ways? I mean, how do you manage to be the alliance partner of the US and the trading partner of the Chinese?
Well, it's a great question, and it's probably the question that will continue to dominate the strategic space for as long as I'm involved in politics. Firstly, I think it's really important that we arrive at a national bipartisan answer to this question. It matters that there is a detailed understanding of how Australia should approach this, and you can't do that over a long period of time unless there is a discussion and an understanding between the major parties on that question. I think it's really important that we let China know that we value the relationship, that they matter to us, and they do. You know, they obviously do, in economic terms, but more than that. I mean, they matter to us in political terms, and we should be interested in building the political relationship with China, and that's important to understand as well. And part of that is not about saying that we dismiss issues of human rights. It's really important that we engage in the judgment of nations around the world on questions of human rights as we submit ourselves to the judgment of other nations about how we engage with human rights. But it's also important to acknowledge that China has some human rights achievements, and we shouldn't be shy in acknowledging them too. They're responsible for the single biggest alleviation out of poverty in human history, and that is a human rights achievement. So, and finally, I'd make the point that we are in an alliance with the United States. That's not a negotiable. It is fundamental to our strategic view, our world view, and China needs to know that, and they do. But from that place, I think it's important that we seek to build the best relationship with China that we can. I mean, ultimately, where I get to on this, Graham, is from where we sit in the Southern Hemisphere, in the East Asian time zone, as a country of 25 million people, when we see America and China working closely together, the world feels like a safer place. If that's right, well, then obviously it flows from that we too ought to be trying to work as closely as we can with China from the place of understanding our alliance with the United States, and that's the strategy that, in my view, we need to pursue. But what's really important is that there is a bipartisan view about how we do that.
Indeed, let's just hope we can maintain that bipartisan view. Richard Marles, thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure, Graham. Thank you.